Thank you, Rachel, for being here on the Dyslexic Maverick podcast. I'm so excited to have you. So one of my first questions I always ask people is, what are you drinking? Because most of us have like at least a drink or two around. So I just want to know
I
what's
love
around you.
that. I love that. That is such a purely neurodivergent question to ask. Currently, I'm being very good. I have plain water and I have an Earl Grey tea. So thank you for asking. And it's not just Earl Grey, it's in my absolute favorite, like kind of cow print mug. So
Yeah,
yeah. What
I
are you
love that.
drinking?
I am so my famous I'm sure listeners will begin to hear this story multiple times. I reuse Starbucks cups as if they're like real ceramics cups. I don't know why. It's my
That's
comfort.
fun.
So I reheat tea. It was a new tea bag, same cup. It's long. I can almost go like a week on one paper cup. It's amazing. And if I lose it, because I lose all these expensive mugs, if I lose this one, it's fine. So actually a detox tea because I'm trying to be
Ooh.
super healthy, and so it's like all the healthy things in this tea. It's not terrible, but it's not
Oh,
probably
okay.
not as nice as your Earl Grey one.
Well, good for you though, and I love that. That's a very executive function friendly hack, and it also makes it probably feel special. Like, look at me, I'm treating myself to a Starbucks, but really, it's just out of
But
your
really,
pantry.
it's just a tea bag, but the
Yup.
bouginess of a Starbucks cup.
Mhm.
Okay, so one quick question before we dive into everything neurodivergency. Uh,
Yes.
I love I know it's an older video, but I saw one about you and the Rubik's Cube. Can you please brag on yourself for a second about you and your Rubik's Cube? Do you have one around?
Mhm, mhm. You know what? It was one of my passing hyperfixations, and I have them in a box somewhere. I have multiple. I got really into like getting the ones that the professionals would use because you could make them go really, really fast. There wasn't like as much friction with it. Anyway, when I was a senior in high school, I got really into the Rubik's Cube. I would bring it to class with me, and like I guess it was the way that I fidgeted, but it was also just me practicing. And that went into like early college. And I promise you, this is how I made friends. I'd be like, hey, you know my record's 31 seconds on the Rubik's Cube. How fast can you do it? So yeah, I mean, I never got to like professional level speeds, but 31 seconds for someone who's very clumsy and a little bit dyspraxic was like pretty darn good for me.
I have never solved a Rubik's Cube, and I can tell you I've spent hours trying.
Okay, so here's the hint is there are what do you call them? Like not algorithms. Algorithms, I guess patterns that you learn and it's basically you just do the same pattern over and over and over again. So like once you get the motor memory of the algorithm of the pattern, you can just do it without even looking or thinking whatever. Then it just becomes how fast can you physically move your hands. It's cool.
Oh my gosh. Okay, this might be my new hyperfixation
It's cool. You
temporarily.
can watch videos on how to learn like how to do the movement and you just keep and then people think it's so impressive, but you're like, really, it's just I'm just going to reflex at this point.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, I hope our listeners are equally as impressed as I am right now.
Thank you for asking. No one has asked about the Rubik's Cube in years, and that was a big claim to fame for me.
I would still own that one every single chance you get. Yep. Awesome. Well, I should give you a formal introduction. So Rachel Robertson is a multiply neurodivergent occupational therapist who co-founded Diverge Community Services for neurodivergent adults. Rachel supports other neurodivergent adults like herself in embracing their neurotype and participating in everyday life to its fullest. Rachel is passionate about all the things brain and creativity and loves to fill her day with endless side quests. Oh my goodness, do we love our side quests? So I have to start out by asking, what's your current side quest?
Okay, today or like this stage of my life?
Well,
So,
I want to hear about both. So let's go with today first.
okay, so today I okay, so this is kind of a side quest and also just a beautiful exemplification of what ADHD can look like just on a typical day. So today I woke up, was kind of in a mental funk, and I'm like, ugh, how can I like find that inner spark within me to do this interview later today? Am I gonna be able to find it? And then I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna start researching microphones. I've been really meaning to get a microphone since I do host a podcast, and I was just relying on like the microphone that was built in the headphones before. And so I started getting really excited about that. And I'm like, okay, I'm excited about a microphone, so I can be excited about the podcast again too. But then I remember I didn't actually have a microphone because the headphones that I had been using for microphones, I lost last weekend when I was out of town. So at 10:30, it's noon now. At 10:30, I realized, oh shit, I don't have a microphone for the podcast in an hour and a half, but I know which fancy one I want to get now. So I'll just go like drive around and see if I can find one. Well, of course, the first two stores I go to are sold out. So at 11:15, I go to my last store that I have time to go to, and I just picked up whatever microphone I could find, and I made it here today. So I think that's beautiful.
Amazing, and you sound wonderful.
Oh, why, thank you. Why, thank you. So I'm thinking a new side quest may be how to improve the sound quality and also the visual appeal of our podcast because I'm already so impressed. Your first trailer and episode you've put out, I'm like, oh, we can do better.
It is a fun hyperfixation that it also includes so much learning, right? Like you're always learning, engaging your brain and trying something new, and I think that that's what our brains love so much. So yeah, no, I'm fully supportive and cheering you on that side quest. So big picture, what's your side quest right now?
Big picture side quests. I have like 400. Most of them revolve currently around gardening or our business, my business. So I've been really interested in learning how to garden for years. I come from a family of master gardeners and naturalists, and I just never got the green thumb. I just like forget to take care of my things, and things have died. But I've decided I'm at the point in my life where I want to actually learn and find the joy in it. And so I did that in a kind of graded approach by just planting one thing in my garden and just like learning all the things about that. And it's taught me so much about just like caring for life in general. So I'm growing pumpkins, and that's been a huge like side quest for the past 3 months of my life, um, which is fun. And then other side quests with Diverge. Diverge is just a collection of side quests, right? Like we just do all of the things. We see the need, and we're like, let's just go for it. Um, so we're currently planning this community-wide party in Washtenaw County, just celebrating neurodiversity. And we've just been like being really bold and inviting like literally anyone and everyone in our community. So a lot of side quests into planning and what a neurodivergent celebration looks like and what we want that to be.
Oh, I love that. Was there any, like, takeaways? I'm just thinking about, like, other listeners, like, even people planning for, like, employees, right? Like,
Yeah.
planning employee events, anything that, like, kind of stuck out that you didn't really think about before you started researching that?
Some of the like main categories of things that I've noticed were about how to make it accessible both in the planning stage and actually like the being present stage. So we've made a lot of efforts to give as much information for the party goers to be able to like plan and anticipate and know what to expect as possible. So it felt like overkill to be giving so much information, but I just kept finding that like these are the questions that I have for myself, and I'm like too ashamed to ask, and I'll just be like, I'll just go and figure it out. But if I can like anticipate that and plan in advance, maybe we can make people feel more comfortable coming into this environment. So things like what to expect in terms of like allergens that will be available, what to expect in terms of will there be designated like quiet and darker spaces for people to decompress? Will there be like what will expectations be? Will people have to stay the whole time? Like just making like what neurotypical people would think are like just explicit or inherent and implicit expectations of a party, really making those explicit and kind of laying them out. Um, so that's been one thing.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, when I'm working with different companies, I say, like, "It be as detailed as humanly possible. Like,
Yeah.
even, like, put in, like, rain delay plans
Yes.
or parking lot maps, right? Like, of if it's an off-site, like, make sure that they have a map of other parking lots that they can park in, or like you said, like, if you don't have to stay the whole time, just come for this, or if they have an agenda, they can pick
Yep.
what they wanna come for. I think that those are all such great ideas, and coming from the HR world, I knew that that was somewhat important, right? And I would try to do it, but I didn't put as much effort into it as I know probably needs to go into it now,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that and that perspective because it just makes it more friendly for people to engage on their comfort level, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And whenever we think about making things accessible for neurodivergent people, we're just really making it more accessible for everyone. Like we are taking the additional steps that will help the neurotypical folks too that they just don't think to ask for, you know?
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
HR kind of sees that. I mean, that's like a focus for your discipline and specialty more than most. It's like how can we really make this approachable and accessible for all of our people? So,
Yes, yes, I agree, and I think more HR leaders are asking those questions, which is great. Um, but then it kind of stops, like, where are the resources? Which is why I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because hopefully we can kind of spark some of those thoughts as people go forward, for sure. So I know another side quest that has been on your radar was a fundraiser of sorts to help lower income neurodivergent adults who may not have the financial resources to get help. Can you talk a little bit more about what you guys did in that respect?
so that's a good example of something that started as like a side quest and has really kind of transformed into like a pillar of our organization. And yeah, that's our scholarship for low income neurodivergent adults. So what started as just selling some like upcycled tie dye sweatshirts that we made ourselves in honor of our late friend who we actually spoke to you right after her passing. Um, she was really, really into like finding old sweatshirts and upcycling them with like bleach dye and giving them new life, and then she'd sell them to people. And so that was her tradition. And so when she passed away early on in our Diverge adventure, we knew in some capacity we wanted to commemorate her and memorialize her because um, she's just been like such a driving force behind Diverge. And her unmet needs are like really what we're trying to help fill in our community. So we started just making some sweatshirts in her honor and selling them. And then we set a goal for ourselves. So we're like, let's actually do this and let's actually try to use this money to make a change for our clients that don't have the resources to be able to access any services really. Um, so that was back in May we started it. And we're like, maybe it's just going to be a one-time thing. Like it was a lot of work, but we were then able to provide free services to multiple individuals who wouldn't have had the opportunity before. And the value we saw in that, we're like, okay, we have to find a way to make this scholarship sustainable and not just a one time thing. So we are still kind of in the brainstorming stages of how to do that as a for profit company. But at our community party coming up, we are having a silent auction as a way to continue to kind of fund that scholarship. And we've had so many beautiful souls throughout our community give like really generous donations, like Red Wings tickets and massages and facials and just like so much. And it's kind of humbling, you know?
That is such a wonderful way to honor your friend, right? Who, just to give listeners a little bit more background, she had found out she was neurodivergent not too soon before she passed. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably in a year or 2-year range before she passed away, is when she was coming to terms with her identity and really starting to kind of work through the trauma of being undiagnosed and multiply marginalized. Um, and it just kind of came at a time that was too late for her, unfortunately.
Hmm. I think that it's such a hard topic to talk about, but it's also an important topic. topic to talk about, because if we don't talk about it, then we're not doing the severity of it justice either. And whether it's a child or an adult, these struggles are very real and they take their toll. And um, it is, we talk a lot about mental health in the big picture of, but I don't think that neurodivergence is specifically called out maybe enough. I know for dyslexics, it's, 90% of suicide notes have dyslexic misspellings in them. And so when you think about that, like, I don't like saying
Oh,
it when I'm speaking, but I also have to say it when I'm speaking because it brings the reality of what our listeners are facing and their families are facing, and it has to be,
mm,
we have to talk about the hard things or else we're not doing as much good, I think, as we could be doing. And so it's
yeah,
awful, but it's our reality, and both of us are doing what we can to make that not a reality, or at least take some of the burden off. But yeah,
yeah,
it's a tall hill to climb, but I think we're both doing it. So thank you for sharing about your friend. I appreciate it, and I think about her often too, especially when I wear my sweatshirt that my daughter tries to steal from me all the time.
pretty
So
cute
I do.
cozy, you can't blame her.
If you do another sweatshirt run, I will definitely be purchasing another one. It's one of both of our favorites that I have to find in her closet most weeks.
That's awesome, thank
Um, oh,
you.
yes, absolutely. So, I would love for you just to talk a little bit more about your journey and kind of how I love watching you on social media and this over the past year and a half, how you've kind of blossomed into your own neurodivergent journey of figuring out your brain a little bit. So can you just tell us a little bit about how that process, like where you kind of came from and then where you're at right now?
For sure, yeah. It's so weird being on this end. It's kind of fun. Whatever, always asking other people their journey. So, like, I knew I had a mental illness far before I knew I was, like, characterized as neurodivergent. It just wasn't a term I was familiar with. So I've, um, experienced I have OCD, and I've experienced obsessive compulsive disorder since I was a child, so I think early symptoms were, like, 4 or 5, um, and were quite debilitating, impacted my ability to, like, do a lot of normal childhood things, like, sleeping. I didn't sleep for a period of time. I had what's called selective mutism, so didn't speak. It wasn't a choice, like selective makes it sound like. It's more they call it like situational mutism. So for just a prolonged period of time, I didn't speak at all, which we always attributed to my OCD. But as I've come to learn more about my neurodivergent self, may also be related to autism. However, um, just a lot of not normal things as a child that I didn't know were not normal because you're a child, you know? Um, that I think my parents definitely noticed. But a lot of it was I didn't have a platform, not a platform, but I didn't have the tools or language to be able to talk about what I was experiencing. So just a lot of suffering. Um, and so I didn't like come to know it as OCD until I was a young adult. I was just diagnosed with like generalized anxiety. And so I was undergoing some treatment for anxiety, but it just really wasn't touching it. It just was making symptoms worse. So it wasn't until like a general practitioner I had was like, the way you describe your symptoms sound very much like OCD. Is that something you've ever heard of or considered? And like, no. So I got referred to an OCD specialist in my area, and it was like, the easiest diagnosis they ever made. Like, yeah, of course you have OCD. And guess what? All the treatment you've been having before, of course it's not going to work because that wasn't for OCD. Um, so in getting treatment for my OCD, which includes like both intensive therapy, but also like medication, I saw a lot of the troubling symptoms go away. But what didn't go away were my sensory differences and my executive dysfunction, and just like a baseline level of really activated nervous system arousal. So, like, all that stuff was still there, even though the OCD was like no longer clinically OCD. It was just like well managed, right? So then we kind of started exploring, okay, so what else is going on then? Um, at the same time, I met Stephanie, my partner, business partner, who is someone who understood and appreciated her neurodivergent identity from very early on, was had, exposure to a lot of that through both her sister's journey and her own, and also had a special interest in it. And so she kind of like introduced me to the world of neurodiversity, and like would drop little pebbles for me to pick up if I wanted to, about like, hey, this is something that autistic people do. And I'd be like, cool. But never like straight out saying like, hey, I think you are neurodivergent in some capacity. So when we started Diverge Community Services, we knew we wanted to work specifically with neurodivergent adults. And I remember having a lot of like imposter syndrome early on, because I'm like, I'm the neurotypical person. Like, what perspective can I bring as the neurotypical person? And I can just remember Stephanie going, yeah, you're the neurotypical person. And
Like, that's so cute.
what's that response? So yeah, then I started reading some of the lovely books that Stephanie so graciously was like, hey, this would be really helpful for us to read to support our clients. And I'm like, every single one is describing me to a T. And so I'm like, oh, so I have ADHD. And so then it kind of came into this blossoming of, my mom has ADHD, my brother has ADHD, my grandma had it. It probably makes sense that I do too, but somehow didn't see that in myself. Was just like really high masking, really highly anxious, and so focused on the OCD symptoms that like didn't see all the other signs there, characteristics. Um, and then through further exploration, and then later therapy and diagnosis through my therapist, realized also autistic. So it's been a crazy like whirlwind of 2.5 years from going to this place of, I had OCD and I'm fixed, to like, no, I will always have OCD. I was born different and I will always be different. And not only is that okay, that now that I see it for what it is, like, that's what makes me me, and I'm awesome?
Yes.
Well,
Yes, you are.
so
Yes, you are.
yeah, it has definitely been a journey, and there've been highs and lows, and like grief and joy and understanding, but also like frustration, and I think just like all of the feelings, and I think that that's normal, you
Mhm,
know, you know.
mhm. I completely agree. Is there one thing looking back that so I think a lot of listeners probably suspect maybe ADHD first, but they're more unaware of both dyslexia and autism on maybe separate scales sometimes, but you speak from lived experiences, I don't, so I always like to pick people's brains. Was there something with the autism specifically, looking back, that you're like, "Oh, that was such an autistic type of trait that I have always done, but I just never correlated?"
Yes, I think so, and even to this day, I struggle to tease out like the distinctly autistic parts of me versus the distinctly ADHD parts of me, because it's just all me, right? Um, but like using the framework and the description of like what classic pure autism is, um, I think like my really intense social phobias growing up, social discomfort, and kind of just like social disinterest, um, that I really deeply masked in high school and college to like survive, and have been kind of unpacking. So I think the social bit for me kind of differentiates from the ADHD, where you can be introverted, of course, and be ADHD. Um, but the like not getting it, the extreme exhaustion in social situations, I think those made it feel more like the autistic bit. Um, and also like my sensory needs. Again, I recognize that a lot of folks with ADHD also experience sensory differences. So that's not like distinct to autism, but I experience hypersensitivity to most of my sensory systems to a level that can be debilitating, especially depending on like my level of emotional regulation. So, whereas you might have like just a few qualities of or like tendencies towards sensory differences, it's like pretty much across the board. Everything for me in some capacity can be disabling. And then I think the last thing, and this doesn't happen with all autistic people, but there's a pretty significant overlapping for autistic people to also have like body awareness and coordination challenges. Sometimes we'll describe it like as dyspraxia. I've never been diagnosed with that, but it is another thing that's very limiting. Like the number of times I have hurt joints, the number of times I have um, sprained my ankles, like, is not normal. Like, we're talking like 30 plus times spraining my ankle, just like a level of clumsiness that is not typical, but can be extraordinarily typical for autistic folks. Um,
Interesting, interesting. To go back to the sensory, because I like to paint the picture. What is one thing that you just if it's happening, like, you just can't the debilitating piece of it? Can you give listeners just one example of what could be debilitating?
yeah, yeah. So for me, the most debilitating things um, are like tactile experiences, so things that I'm feeling or are touching me in some capacity, and also my interoceptive experience. So with tactile, the fact that I have my hair down today is truly extraordinary, and you can tell with the amount of times I'm moving it, like how much it is bothering me. But I'm like, for some reason, felt like I wanted to wear my hair down today. But like having things on my body, especially if I'm already a little bit dysregulated, can truly make it feel like I'm suffocating. And it's a weird thing to describe because it's like clearly you know you're not, but you just feel like so trapped and suffocating. And like the number of times I wanted to like shave my genuinely just like shave my head or just like remove my clothes in situations that aren't appropriate. Um, but it just feels so unsafe in a way that's hard to describe, but not always, right? It's the level of dysregulation I'm experiencing and how much tolerance I have for that tactile input because it's like I never don't notice it, but I sometimes have more capacity to like process it than others.
Uh,
Um,
I I love thank you so much for sharing
yeah.
that. I think you did such a wonderful job of that, and I think that's sometimes what makes neurodivergent brain so hard to understand is that sometimes we can work with it and overcome the whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
The lack of focus or the sensory inputs or some days I can spell better than other days. And
Yeah.
so I understand from a neurotypical point of view how you would think like, gosh, Nancy, gosh, Rachel, just you did it yesterday. Why can't you
Mm,
suck it up, buttercup, and do it again today? Um,
yeah.
and it's hard to explain, it's hard for other people to understand, and it it doesn't make sense to us sometimes either, which I think is the one
Yeah.
piece that we forget, and we don't wanna be feeling like that either, but it's very real, and,
Yeah.
um yeah,
Yeah.
and it's confusing for everybody, right? For both sides. And so,
100%.
yeah, I think that's such a good I mean, the fact that you would have loved to have shaved your head, right? Like, that is not necessarily a typical thing that most people would consider, especially at, like, a younger age, right? And
Yeah.
the fact that it was that overwhelming in some points that sounded like the best option, I think gives the gravity that you face some days. Are there
Mhm.
things I know for me there are, but I'm curious for you, are there things that kind of trigger the dysregulation where it's harder some days to deal with that?
Yeah, for sure. Um, a big one that I've only recently, like, really paid attention to and noticed, patterns around is, like, fluctuating hormones with, like, my menstrual cycle. Um, so in, like, the week leading up to and during my period, my ability to basically, tune out the background noise of tactile and interoceptive input is much, much, much harder. Um, and I think that makes sense because we are experiencing this increase in like emotional dysregulation and also decreased capacity to be able to like executive function and regulate those emotions. So the time of month is definitely a big one that I think affects a lot of menstruating individuals that once they realize can be really useful information because you can anticipate it a little bit more and you can be a little bit kinder and show yourself a little bit more grace when that's happening. Um, Other triggers, um, I am what I would describe as like a hyper empath. I have this It might be synesthesia. The jury's still out if it's synesthesia or just like an exaggerated expression of what typical people experience. But I have this weird thing where I physically feel what other people are feeling when I have an emotional connection to them, and so um, oftentimes that looks like pain, but it can also look like pleasant things, like when people are stretching and like it's like I feel vibration in my body or I feel pain in my body, and that can be very draining and exhausting. So like when I'm spending a lot of time around people who are in physical, emotional, or mental pain, like that's pretty all consuming for me, and it makes it a lot harder for me to have the capacity to do and regulate the other things. So as a therapist, as an occupational therapist, working in the hospital and working with people who are frequently in pain, um, it's heavy work, and it comes with a lot of I need a lot of downtime, a lot of recovery time.
Yeah. I think that again is such you're just hitting all these great points of things that people may not necessarily associate with their differently wired brains, but I think for so many of us, maybe not to the extent that you feel other people and what was that word again? Can you describe that word? Because I don't think I could say it properly.
Yeah, synesthesia, and I think it's called like I forget what it's called. Something tactile synesthesia. I can't remember, but I'll message you later.
Okay. Okay, yeah, yeah. Maybe we can put it in the show notes
There
if
you go.
somebody wants
Yeah.
to Google it.
Yeah.
But I do think maybe not to that level, but to some level, a lot of people, at least with ADHD, dyslexia, maybe autism as well, have more of that physical connection and maybe an emotional connection is a better way to put it. Um, that to other people, and we do carry the weight. I know when I'm, again, working with clients in the workplace, if I see someone who's really just a really strong empath, one of the warnings to them and to their manager is we've gotta protect their mental state,
Yeah.
right? And that's really hard to do as you're an occupational therapist, right?
Yeah.
And a little bit easier in some corporate environments, but we have to create that bubble around ourselves to protect our own mental state, to have enough energy just to do the things we need to do. It is different than the way most brains are
Yeah.
wired. Most brains can kind of turn it off. I know, my husband can watch movies and I can't even hear it in another room, just a little clip of it, and it will affect me for days.
Mm.
I'll just have this kind of awful thoughts around whatever was happening in that clip that I heard, and it doesn't even mean that that clip was awful, it's just the way I interpreted that clip
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
heard that I when I walked past the room, and so he really anything with any type of violence, he wears AirPods because then at
Mm.
least I don't hear it, and I intentionally don't go in the room so I don't see it, but it's just one of the
Mm.
ways that we protect my brain from
Yeah.
getting any of that negative stimulation in, but I agree that it can go in the positive too. And when I see people that are happy and, like, crying because 'cause they're
Mhm.
happy, I literally like, even talking about it right now, like, I could start crying just thinking
Yeah.
about, like, the elevator of the person coming home from the airport and being so excited to see their new loved one that they haven't seen in so long. Like, all of those visual images come back too, and I could literally, I feel as happy as that mom, whatever, seeing the
Yeah.
guy like, I'm literally getting emotional right now, and I think that that's
I
just very real life for us.
Yeah.
And so it can work in the positive and the negative and also make us look a little odd at times, right? When we're, like, crying in the airport, just going on a business trip. But, um, it's real, and I think the more we talk about it, the more we bring light to the things that are different for us, but it's not bad different, it's just simply
Mm.
different.
Oh, thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing that and, like,
Yeah.
normalizing, like, the empathetic experience, and I really do think that it is such an honor and such a burden, and, I'm just in this current context of what's going on in the world right now, something just happened that feels, like, so relevant to this conversation. I'm not sure if you heard about it, but, um, Tim Walz's son, did you
Yeah.
see this? You
Yeah,
heard about
but
this?
but go
Okay.
but go ahead and talk
Oh,
through it
okay,
with the
okay.
listeners. Yeah.
So anyway, the current, Democratic VP nominee or elect, whatever we call it, his he was giving a speech at the Democratic convention, and his family was there in the audience, and, they panned to his family out there, and he has a multiply neurodivergent son, much like myself, who was just so overwhelmed and overcome with, like, positive emotion and love for his dad and was, like, visually showing that in ways that is, like, you don't see in those contexts and you don't see in public. And, like, that level of, like, purity and emotion is, I think, such a beautiful thing that so many neurodivergent people experience and is what is one of the things that is so, like, quelched by masking is like we feel like we shouldn't feel as much as we do and it's not okay to show the way that we feel but that moment and like the reception in like the internet and the public of just like really appreciating and acknowledging the love that was shown between these two men, I think it's really powerful, and I think it's really powerful for the neurodivergent narrative and understanding that like different doesn't mean bad, and in some
Mhm.
cases, it's really beautiful. So
Yeah. I absolutely agree, and I think those are the special moments that we need to keep celebrating, right? And I think that may not have happened 10 years ago, right? Or 15 years ago when
yeah.
most people didn't even know what a neurodivergent brain was. They'd never heard of the term. It's also new, even for those of us that have neurodivergent
Yeah.
brains, it still feels new. And so to see the positives in that way, I just think is an amazing. It doesn't matter what side of the political realm you're on, to see that
Right.
moment, I think is special, and it's true. It's an authentic view of how some of us truly see and feel the world. So,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so I know we only have a few minutes left. I'm gonna try to lighten it up here just a little
Okay.
bit 'cause I feel like we've been, like, super serious, which is
Yeah.
great. It's great. But, okay, so one of the things that you talk about a lot on social media, and I love it because it rings so true, and I think it will ring so true for so many of our listeners as well, is your I don't even know how to describe this in, like, the most accurate way, but I love it. Like, the pure dread and awfulness of meal planning, prepping, going to the grocery store, all of the things that go around trying to feed our bodies, which we need so desperately to eat, and yet it feels like the most awful process ever. And so if you haven't checked out Diverge Community and their TikTok pages, you certainly have to do that. We'll put it all in the show notes of where to go to find Rachel and Stephanie. But I would love to know, because you're so authentic about this awfulness that we have to do. Are there any tips? Because I know we are not the only 2 that struggle with
Yeah.
this. Any tips for, like, grocery stores or meal planning, anything that you found that kinda gets you through?
Yeah, yeah, avoidance? No, kidding. Sometimes, though. Sometimes don't do it. No, no, no. So, yeah, thinking about food, preparing food, cleaning up after food, grocery shopping, like, all of that, all those activities are probably the biggest spoon drainer, the biggest source of, sucking out my energy that I can think of. So I have tried all of the strategies to somehow make it better and to also like feel like I'm still nourishing and feeding my body and not just always eating fast food. Um, so some things work sometimes, but again, it depends on the capacity I have. Like, do I have the capacity to use my strategies and tips right now? Or am I going to need support and like going to need my husband to do those things for me in this period of time? And that's very real. Sometimes that's what that looks like. Like I need that external support to eat. Um, so the things that make grocery shopping better for me is planning the time of day that you're going. That's huge. Some stores will even have like designated low stimulation hours. Um, for me, the lighting's bad, but it's also just trying to navigate a crowded space with a lot of people that is just immediately overwhelming. And then having to make what feels like a million decisions that even though they're small, like they're small, they feel really big and important in that moment. And that like analysis paralysis, that decision making fatigue can just go out the window. So going earlier in the day, going on like off times if you can. And then for me, I like to bring my noise canceling headphones. I like to bring something to drink, and I have to have a snack in my car because I know I'm going to be depleted, and I got to get home still. So grocery shopping, that's yeah,
Those are amazing strategies. And, I mean, there's so many things. I know some people use, like, the grocery pickup where you can, like, order online and then just pull in and they can load it in the back of your car, which I think could also be helpful too for some people if they
yeah,
can't do the actual shopping at that point. But I love the quieter hours. The headphones I think are just great. Like, even if you don't have music playing, just the fact of, like,
yeah.
less stimulation coming in can be really, really important, and I agree. So I generally go to a store that has, like, a good, Starbucks in it as well because
Smart.
that's my treat to, like, okay, if I've gotta do this grocery shopping, I'm
Yeah.
at least gonna enjoy, like, a hot, comforting drink while I
Yeah.
do it, and I kind of have reframed it as, like, me time too, like, I get to search the
Oh,
aisles by myself. Now, we've got 3 children at home too, right? So,
yeah.
like, even sitting waiting for a gas pump to come open is me time that I cherish as well.
It's so valid. Yeah.
But those, like, I've tried to kind of reframe it, so I love those kind of
Mm,
tips. And it made me think of one other thing, kind of bouncing around a little bit, but our ADHD folks will
that's what we do
appreciate that.
best. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. As far as the workplace goes, I think something we probably don't talk about enough and maybe don't even realize enough is OCD in the workplace and how that can be really debilitating. I'm thinking of a time my one good friend, her daughter has OCD, and is how the ADHD brain works. I'm thinking grocery store and now to workplace, but she
Yeah.
was in a grocery store with her like 12-year-old daughter, and they ran into a family friend, and the family friend was introduced and they shook her hand. Like, she went out to shake her hand, and the 12-year-old daughter panicked because that was something that she wasn't comfortable with, and she was
Mm,
already dysregulated from the day. And we then had a conversation later, just the 2 of us, about, gosh, can you imagine when she grows up and goes to a job interview, extending a hand and shaking during an interview could be something that's uncomfortable and maybe dysregulates an already an
yeah.
emotionally challenging time. Are there any things like that that you found in the workplace that on the OCD side that would be kind of informational to share?
Yeah. So, for my, like, personal lived experience with OCD, mine was, like, what they call, like, pure OCD, which is, like, obsessive, like, primarily obsessions versus the compulsion, though I did have some compulsions, and, are primarily focused on, like, other people I love and care about getting injured or hurt, or, like, health related things, but not germs or what have you. Um, but in my experience, it become I describe it as having like a really, really sticky brain. So if I have a thought about something or a concern about something or something that I'm trying to accomplish, my brain, it's like hyper focus, but it's not something you want to be stuck in, and it's not a productive thing. And if you don't have the strategies to get out of it, you just feel like you're stuck in this quicksand that is like quickly pulling you down and you can't get out of it. So I would see that happening sometimes at work, which would make it really, really challenging for me to always prioritize my time in a way that was in line with like what my managers wanted or like what my career goals were, because I could get really stuck into this thing that felt so important and all consuming that I couldn't necessarily get out of. So I think like lending that perspective may be helpful when we're thinking about how can we support individuals when they're kind of like off course of where they should be. And it might not always be like this volitional, intentional abstinence or like even something they want to be, but genuinely feel stuck and don't know how to get out of it. Um, and I think just a general better understanding of what OCD is and how prevalent it is really big, because I, for most of my jobs, did not disclose that I had OCD. But for the one job that I did, it was met with a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of fear, a lot of, well, we can't give you important assignments then, right? Because like you're not going to be capable of managing that and taking care of yourself. Um, so I think there's just a long way to go into understanding like what OCD is and looks like, and how folks with OCD can still be extraordinary um, team members and employees, because like that that level of focus and care um, can be, while it can be self-destructive, it can also be extraordinarily beneficial in getting like quality work as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I
Yeah.
appreciate that different and to be honest, I'm learning as you're talking, right? Because like, I'm thinking of maybe what I think of as OCD, and that may be an aspect of it, but it's certainly not the only aspect of it, and the obsessive part is something that is yeah, it's so interesting. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
and giving our listeners a little bit better peek into that world as well. Um, Perfect. Well, good. Well, I wanna wrap up with what is one thing that you wish your clients truly understood and embraced about their brain?
Like, I really feel like neurodivergent brains are limitless, and I think that's something that I've learned about my own brain that I wish other people saw too, because there are so many ways in which society, our previous experiences, self-doubt, ableism, like, tries to constrain that, and I think it is the constraint or the trying to, like, box in the neurodivergent brain that results in all of the awful things that we were talking about earlier, right? And I think if it's like you can appreciate that your brain is limitless and it's so powerful in so many beautiful ways, I just think that that makes all the difference in the world for believing yourself and for finding what, I don't know, what makes you you, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. Thank you. And that was very concise, by the way. You
Well,
did a
I
great
tried
job
really
of answering
hard. I
that.
thank you, thank you, thank you. I feel like I've just word vomited this whole interview, but I probably won't watch
Oh.
it, but thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing
No.
and being so vulnerable with your own experiences. It's literally the best, and I'm sure the other listeners will absolutely resonate with some of what you've said
Mhm.
and hopefully feel validated in that process. So, I know listeners can find you at Diverge Community Services, right? You're on all social media. You've got
Yep.
Neurodivergent Voices on YouTube, which is your
Mhm.
podcast. And I was one of your first guests on that. So
You
that
were
was
before it was even a podcast, it was just a TikTok series. Yeah.
yeah,
I
so
love that.
I love that. Encourage everyone to go check that out, follow along, reach out to Rachel or Stephanie if you've got questions or need occupational therapy help, especially if you're a neurodivergent adult. So, great. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you for your time. Until next time, friends. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. It is literally the best way you can support our work here. And if you're feeling extra generous, take a screenshot and tag us on social with one of your takeaways from the episode. Until next time, friends, embrace that unique brain you've been given.